On today's show, we'll be joined by weekly co-host Alykhan Bijani to take a look at some of the issues with this Rockets team to start this season, namely the offensive catastrophe that was the most recent game against the Utah Jazz. We'll take a look at some synergy numbers for the season as a whole. We'll also focus on some of the issues with the Rockets offense and ways that this Rockets team can improve. All of that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as Rockets Watch. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin. The show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube, where you can help the show out a ton by commenting on the show. Today's question for the show: how can the Rockets offense improve? What would you like to see the Rockets start implementing more of in their offense? As always, appreciate you for making LOR your first listen each and every day. Joining us now is our weekly co-host, none other than Alykhan Bijani, the X's and O's man himself. You can follow on Twitter at Rockets_insider. And Alykhan, you are here at an optimal time. We had to shake up the week a little bit. Had Ben on a different day. We have you on a different day this week. I had some scheduling stuff, and I appreciate you and Ben being able to acquiesce to my ridiculous demands of moving the days around as far as the LOR schedule is concerned. But man, hopefully you can shed some light on the problems, the issues plaguing this Houston Rockets team currently, because I'll tell you what, man, the offense does not look good. It looks like identity does not exist. There's a lot to unpack about what took place or didn't take place against this Utah Jazz game, Utah Jazz team recently, most recent game for the Rockets, and just kind of on the season as a whole. There have been some promising signs, some things that we can be happy about and walk away feeling good about, but there's also been, I think, a little bit more bad than good this season so far. But I know that you had some synergy stats that you wanted to present to our listeners to kind of paint a picture about what the Rockets have done so far through 5 games this season.
Yeah, I do have some things to be able to share with our audience. And for those of you who watch us on YouTube, you'll be able to view the different stats. For those of you who listen to us through audio, you'll be able to see them on my Twitter feed, so you can check them out there, the synergy stats. And I'll also read some out loud that kind of stand out to me. So when I look at synergy stats, right, it's all dependent on context, and stats are not just, you can't just read them by themselves. And that's what we're going to be going over the course of the show. But I want to highlight a few things. They played against Atlanta. They scored 107 points. Defense was good that game for the Rockets. It was a good start. Then they play Memphis and Milwaukee. Memphis, they should have won. Honestly, they should have won that game. Milwaukee, they got blown out badly. Then you play Utah, you win, and then you play again, Utah again, and you lose. But there are some good games offensively, right? Against Memphis, you scored 122. Against Atlanta, you scored 107, but that was a pretty good offensive game, I would say. Against Utah, you win, you score 114. So in those wins, there's something that stands out to me, and that is they're getting to the rim. Okay, they scored 55 plus points in games they either won or they should have won in the first 5 games of the season. They're scoring less than that when they're not driving to the rim. So Jackson, driving to the rim, interesting. What does that mean? Why is that such an important stat? Well, when you're a young team and you're trying to get your offense going and you're trying to establish, different protocols, plays, actions, where you're supposed to be positioning, timing, that all leads to you getting high percentage shots. And high percentage shots usually mean baskets around the rim. So if you're scoring 60 plus around the rim, that means you're getting to the rim with ease and you're getting high percentage looks at the basket. But I have to tell you, especially in that second Utah game, I did not see that. I saw a lot of bad positioning, saw a lot of bad timing, and frankly, bad body language when it comes to where players were supposed to be offensively. And that to me is what's concerning. They're a young team and they're going to make mistakes, right? Their starting lineup is full of 19, 20-year-olds. You have Eric Gordon in there, but for the most part, it's a young team. The rotation is very young. That doesn't excuse the fact that you should not be playing with the same bad habits that you were trying to grow out of last year into this year.
Yeah, I think it was really disappointing to see, and I do think those numbers are encouraging in the games that have looked good this year, because I think we can go through 5 games and we think, okay, the first 2 games, yes, they were losses against the Hawks and the Grizzlies, but those were 2 hard-fought competitive games. And I think there was a lot of positives to be taken away from those games. Then you have the blowout game against the Bucks, where it's the Bucks home opener. Giannis drops 44. Like, it's, there's no way to contain him. And you're like, all right, you chalk that up, schedule loss, whatever, second night of a back-to-back, whatever you want to call it. Then you get the game against Utah, and you're going back and forth with Utah, and this is a hot Utah Jazz team. Things have looked good, and you're actually going toe-to-toe with them. You're catching them on the second night of a back-to-back, though, so, maybe it's a schedule loss for them, whatever. Things still looked, solid that game. But then you go up to Utah in Game 5, and that's when things start falling apart, right? And I do think that this team in that game fell into some really bad habits, right? They fell into the bad habits of, okay, it's 5-out spacing. Guys are not moving. They're standing around on the perimeter. KPJ has the ball or Jalen has the ball. They're trying to attack in isolation. And sometimes it works because they have the talent.
Jackson. It happens when you're a Utah team and you're switching everything, right? When you're switching everything, the purpose of switching, if you're a Rockets fan and if you've been a Rockets fan for a few years, you've learned what switching does. That's disrupt the rhythm of the opposing team. It's supposed to get them out of movement. It's supposed to make them stationary in their offense and do one-on-one. That's why the Rockets were successful with their switching defense. Now, you put that on the Rockets as a young team now, what is that going to do? That's going to force them to play one-on-one, take advantage of mismatches, get the Jazz into rotation. And what the thing that was is that when the Jazz got in rotation, for the most part, they were pretty good at it. And how can you as a Rockets, as a young team, defeat that? You don't even have to run an action, Jackson. Just get into position. When one guy is crashing from the slot, which is a key for the Rockets this season, is to basically when a guy attacks towards the basket and that slot shooter reads that there is a help defender coming and they're playing off of them, you're supposed to crash. You're supposed to cut to be an outlet. Why are we not seeing that consistently? We're seeing it a lot more than last year, but that should be consistent. When you're seeing a defender pretty much just step in at the nail, and you have 2 guys on the strong side, one of them should be stepping in instead of flare screen for the other. Nobody's saying to move the ball or move without the ball, like Stephen Curry. Okay, nobody's asking you to do a motion offense, but I guarantee you, Steven Silas and his coaching staff doesn't want these guys to stay stationary. When you're reading that the team is switching and they're playing in the shell, how do you beat the shell? You move and you create gaps, and you create gaps by doing those small things. And that first quarter, especially against Utah in that second game, was a very bad example, a poor example of what you should be doing offensively.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful point you bring up, that it doesn't necessarily have to be actions off the ball, but it has to be players reading what the defense is doing, right? And I do think way too often in this Utah game, the second one, players were just stationary. They were standing around. There wasn't anything happening. Nobody was reading and then reacting appropriately to how the Jazz were sending help defenders over, to how they were switching things, and it just, a lot of the offense did boil down to, all right, Kevin has the ball, Jalen has the ball, they're going to try and create something, and that's just it. And it did not work for 3.5 quarters of the game. Kevin Porter Jr. tapped into another gear in the fourth quarter and started really getting downhill, getting things going, and just his talent was shining through in that fourth quarter. But that, very clearly, it's not sustainable because it didn't work for the first 3 quarters, and the Rockets almost mounted a comeback in that fourth quarter, but it just wasn't enough for them to eventually get over the hump, because it's not a sustainable version of offense if you don't have guys who are reading, cutting, crashing, reacting to the way that they're being defended.
One last point that I want to make on this, about especially the stats. This is not on the stats that I'll be sharing, but I'm just going to read it out loud. Rockets are in the 87th percentile in isolation offensively. Makes up around 10% of their offense. 87%. That means they're scoring 1.14 points per possession when they're in isolation. Now, if I actually watched the video, which I did, and you look at the context, those isolation baskets, when do those usually happen? In transition, when they're pushing the basketball, right? And so that's the context that leads to it. Now let's look at some other things. This is all from Synergy, right? Context matters. I'm not going to take this exactly at face value, but I want you to think about it, Jackson. Pick and roll, ball handlers had a pick and roll. They spent 22% of their offensive position or possessions result in something for the pick and roll ball handler, 17th percentile. Spot up shooting, 20th percentile. Transition, they're one of the worst in the league, attacking in transition. Turnovers, smart plays, getting into your spots, positioning, timing. I'm not going to sit here and say the Rockets don't run an offense because that's just false. That's category false. Rockets do run an offense, but you run an offense by getting into position, by executing, by timing everything. And as of right now, this young group is making a lot more young mistakes than they are when it comes to executing like you're supposed to do.
Coming up, want to run back a clip from Stephen Silas post-game, sharing his thoughts on what was going on with the Rockets offense. We're going to get there in just a moment after a quick message from our friends over at Prize Picks. Tonight, I'm going to take Luka Doncic to score more than 26.5 points. How about LeBron James to have more than 7.5 rebounds? Kevin Durant, we'll take the under on 4.5 assists. And how about Steph Curry? We'll take more than 3.5 threes. Look, what is Prize Picks? How does it work? It's so simple. You pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Pick projections, you can win up to 10 times back on your money on any entry that you submit. No competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. That's NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, you name it, they've got you covered over at Prize Picks. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. So go download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, as we kind of continue navigating this conversation, discussing some of the issues facing this Rockets offense currently, let's hear from the man himself. Let's hear from Stephen Silas and his thoughts immediately after the Rockets Jazz game on what some of the issues were.
Yeah, that's what happens when you play a team 2 times in a row, right? They're going to make the adjustments. So, there's 2 parts to it. There's taking it more personal that we just ISO'd, right? And if you're getting ISO'd, you're going to take the challenge probably a little bit more the second time. And then if you see that there's going to be ISOs, then you are more prone to help and more ready to help in those situations, causing decisions to be made with the ball. So we told them before the game that we weren't going to be able to play the same way that we played in game 1. But that's like a playoff type thing where you do something in game 1, they adjust to it, and now you have to make the next adjustment.
So Stephen Silas kind of highlighting some of the problems facing the Rockets going from game 1 against the Jazz, where they also isolated quite a bit in that game as well. And then game 2 against the Jazz, where the isolations clearly didn't pay off nearly as much. Now, Alykhan, one of the things that I was curious about and wanted to kind of go back and take a look at was this Rockets team. It just doesn't feel like they're moving the ball enough, right? Offensively, that's what part of the isolation stuff is. And so I actually had a chance, I wanted to go back and I had a chance to ask Stephen Silas about it at practice in between these 2 games, referencing game 1 against the Jazz, where the Rockets wound up having a collective 17 assists on their 38 made shots, which to me is not a good ratio of assists to made buckets. And Steven's answer didn't inspire a lot of confidence, honestly. And I should have prepared the clip, but it was more or less something along the lines of, we just wound up isolating a bit more than we probably should have. And I'm paraphrasing there, but that was basically the answer. And I cannot help but think that one of the reasons that we're seeing, especially this level of play, this level of isolation play, 5 out, whatever, in these past 2 games is because they are missing Alperen, Sengun, and Bruno Fernando, yes. 2 guys who provide added dimensions to this Rockets offense.
And I mean, Jackson, do you have the stats pulled up? Because we were talking about this before we started recording. If we look at the amount of assists the team has had when those guys have played, even if it's just one of them, even if it's Alp or Bruno versus in the games they haven't, I think it's pretty alarming. Do you have it up, Jackson?
Yeah, I do. So, I mean, we can go back to game 1 against the Hawks, which was the point center game for Bruno Fernando, if you will. He was great. He had 7 dimes. He was tied for a team high 7 assists that game. So he had 7, and then Alp actually managed to walk away with 0 assists that game, which is a bit shocking for Alp. But so, I mean, between those two guys combined, so Alp 0, Bruno 7 of the 25 team assists in that
25 game. 25. That's a key number. How about the second game?
Second game we look at Bruno, who had 2 assists, and then we go down to Alp. He had 3 assists, so they had 3 of the 18 assists against the Memphis Grizzlies. 18 on 44 made shots. Still not a great number, but the centers are, they're accounting for a handful of the assists there. Yeah. And then we go back to we can go to the Milwaukee Bucks game, the first game without Bruno Fernando, where Usman Garuba actually started, and Us had a couple assists in that starting lineup, and then Alp off the bench, also a couple assists. So 4 of the 20 team assists coming from the center spot. And then we can look at the first Utah Jazz game without either of those two guys, and the Rockets' assist number cratering to just 17 assists. Jabari had a couple assists out of the 5 spot, and then no assists anywhere else off the bench. Just bad play.
Yeah,
so, I mean...
That's a big part of why you need to have Bruno Fernando and Alperen Sengun there, no matter who's starting, is because they, like you said, give you a dimension. One, with Bruno, you get vertical spacing. That is so important with the young team. The reason why Kevin Porter Jr. was matched with Bruno Fernando in his minutes for the first 2 games of the season, because you're giving KPJ, a guy like KPJ who likes to drive, who likes to have the ball in his hands and drive, a chance to have a fail-safe over the top to Bruno Fernando. And they've connected on a good number of lobs, at least when they've played together this season. Jalen Green with Alp, you get 2 guys one who likes the ball, the other who also likes the ball, but is willing to move with it. And then you have them having the little 2-man action that's opening up some shots too, which is why I said it last week too. I'm a big proponent of staggering Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green to kind of allow for that ball movement and that player movement to exist. But I want to say something, Jackson. I don't think there's just one place we can point at the Rockets offense, like just saying that's the problem. We have to consider different things. You have a starting lineup that is full of first, second, or third year players. You have a team that is used to having you have a team full of players who are used to having the ball in their hands. And let me say this, they're successful with the ball in their hands, or they're more comfortable right now with the ball in their hands. And I think the key word there is comfortable. They're not used to playing with a team like this where they're all playing a role with each other. Who's the hierarchy? Is it Kevin Porter Jr.? Who's the hierarchy? I mean, it looks like it. Then is it Jalen Green? Where's Jabari in all of this? Where's Eric? Where's Jae'Sean? I mean, yesterday. What I'm trying to say is there a pecking order?
It's weird because it feels like throughout preseason and then in the first couple games of the season, it did feel like there was a pecking order. It felt very clearly like it was like, all right, cool. Like Kevin and Jalen are very much your 2 primary guys within the offense. And then outside of that, other guys have a chance to kind of step up, whether it's Alp or Jabari, or even in the season opener against Atlanta, the shot diet was spread very clearly along, it was Jalen, KPJ, and Jabari took the majority of the Rocket shots. And then other guys got their little, 5-6 field goal attempts outside of the big 3, if you will. And that felt like a good shot diet. That felt like how it should be within the hierarchy of the Rockets offense. And since that point, I don't know, it feels like the hierarchy is still kind of there, but it doesn't feel very fluid over the course of a given game.
I don't think it's time to freak out yet, though, Jackson. I think what the frustration is you want to see progress. You want to see structure. And from the looks of it, you want the Rockets to eventually play out of structure because the timing and positioning is there. But right now, in my opinion, when I watch the games, a lot of it has to do with a young team that's making mistakes and falling back into old habits and not playing with that timing, not playing with that positioning. I don't think it has anything to do with the lack of offense. The Rockets have an offense. They play 5 out, they play 4 in. There's different components to it. There's horns, right? Which if you're on Twitter, you may have seen. There's pistol, which we have talked about in great lengths with me as a guest on this show. There's delay, there's Chicago. If you want to Google these, you can Google them. You can reach out to me, and I'm more than happy to explain these to you in more detail and send you clips. There are actions the Rockets run. Don't get me wrong. But after that initial action that coach is calling, or KPJ is calling when he brings the ball up, or somebody's calling, after that initial action, what's next? If a team is switching and taking it away, what's next? You have to move. You have to establish your positioning.
And that to me is the part that it's that what's next, where I understand in theory, the offense for Silas is very read and react oriented, right? After that initial action, it's reading and then reacting to whatever the defense does. But is that the best possible offense for a team that is, as you mentioned, right, so ridiculously young? Could they not maybe benefit from a bit more structure, or having opportunities rather than Kevin Porter Jr. being tasked with, oh, well, we ran the first screen and we got all right, well, defense switched. Okay, well, there's no advantage created. Now it's my turn to just boom, 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 do my thing. Like, because that's what it feels like it's devolving into a lot, is they are running that initial action, or that initial screen or whatever, but then they're not generating the advantage.
Yeah, I'm gonna share 2 thoughts, and I'm not trying to defend anybody. I'm just trying to share thoughts from a basketball perspective. Ideally, you want the players to learn how to do that, because in situations where teams are switching late in games, you want these players to be comfortable making those types of decisions and reads. And so personally, I like the Rockets being in the situation. Now, they are falling in bad habits. And when you're in bad habits, you have to get out of it. You have to call plays to get the team back and focused into what is going on in that game. I 100% agree. But I think it's also a good thing that they're learning this now, so they can establish that cadence of kind of what to do in a specific situation. I'm going to read a quote. My colleague Kelly wrote an article on Jalen Green's development. Okay. And just player development overall. It's on The Athletic. You can read it. He's tweeted about it many times. Great stuff. This is a quote from Rick Higgins. Quote, "Spacing is incredibly important how we play. We have our certain philosophy in how we want to attack teams. It can't be accomplished if we are in each other's way. If we are punching up sides of the floor, if the ball's only staying on one side of the floor, there are a lot of things that will allow us to be successful, but we can't be successful if we have bad spacing. That's step 1. It's almost impossible to get a good shot when you are spaced terribly," unquote. That's it for me. Young guys have to be disciplined to get into the proper spots. If the spacing is there, this whole clamoring about Rockets don't run an offense, it will be solved. If the spacing is there and you set a solid screen, all of this will be solved. If the spacing is there, that means the team is playing disciplined. Can the players play disciplined? Can the coaches, can Steven Silas get his team to not fall into these bad habits? That is what I'm looking at. There's one play I want to highlight. I have this play, Jackson, on my Twitter feed. Okay, so you can watch it. It's like 28 seconds long. You can watch from start to finish after the rebound, Jalen Green bringing it up all the way to the Jae'Sean Tate put back, and they're going back to the floor. When you watch that clip, I'm going to describe it too, but when you watch that clip on my Twitter feed, I want you to pay attention to the body language. Watch Jae'Sean Tate. Watch Eric Gordon. Watch KPJ. Watch Jabari. Watch Jalen. Where are they supposed to be? Okay. If you've read Kelly's article, and if you followed a lot of the X's and O's guys on Twitter, you know what the Rockets were supposed to do on that play. Now I'm going to describe it here for our podcast listeners, but I want you guys to watch that play if you can on my Twitter feed and see what I'm talking about.
We're gonna give you a second to watch that play though, because this is actually a perfect segue. Because if you're not driving or doing something else, you can actually grab that play and take a look at it as we dive into wanting to dissect it and break it down. Because I knew that we were going to get to this point at some point in the show. It also brought up the point that I wanted to build. I just wanted to be able to say, if you build the spacing, the offense will come. That's the throwaway line that I wanted to chime in there. But coming up, we do want to break down that specific play that Alykhan has in mind, and kind of again, just describing what this Rockets offense can be or should be when it's being run appropriately. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, Alykhan, you have this play that you want to kind of walk our listeners through and kind of just break down for us. So I will turn things over to you. Walk us through it.
Okay, so it's 8:35-ish, 8:34-ish left in the first quarter. It ends with the Jae'Sean Tate putback. But there's a lot to it. It's a microcosm, I feel like, of what's been going on. Okay. Jalen Green brings the ball up the floor. He gets, Jared Vanderbilt got rejected at the rim, or he just missed a shot. No call, so he was still down on the floor. Rockets have a 5-on-4. Okay, so Jalen Green brings the ball up the floor. Jae'Sean Tate has no idea what the play is. I guess Jalen didn't communicate. Nobody communicated with Jae'Sean. Jae'Sean's walking up. He's like the trailing guy. Jabari's next to Jalen on the right side. Jae'Sean is walking up on the left as a trailing big. He's putting his arms like, what's the call? What's going on here? Then he notices something. Lauri Markkanen is matched up on Jalen Green. Now, Jackson, if Lauri Markkanen is on Jalen Green, what is Jalen Green going to do?
Take him to the basket because that's a mismatch.
19 seconds in the shot clock. Jalen Green is matched up one-on-one with Lauri Markkanen, ball in his hands at the right wing. 19 seconds. Do you think he attacks there? Yes or no?
He does not.
No. He attacks way, much later in the possession. Why is that? Let's figure it out. Like I said, Jae'Sean's on the left side, right? He walks up to the left, top of the key, left wing-ish area. Kevin Porter Jr. is by himself. There's one defender and 2 players on that left side. Jae'Sean's like, yo, I'm making a little signal with my thumb putting my thumb behind my back. Yo, he's wide open right there behind you. Jae'Sean's pointing it out to Jalen. And then at the same time, Jalen's like, hey, Jabari, you got to clear out, man. I got a mismatch right here. You got Kelly Olynyk next to you. Just kind of slip. So Jabari slips. Okay. Jabari was supposed to go to the corner. Instead, he goes to the dunker spot. Jae'Sean's trying to set a flare screen, which then kind of, when that happens and you're a player and you see your player trying to set a flare screen, you got to maintain spacing. You got to move back. You got to be in a position where you're not drawing an extra help defender towards you. Jalen finally sees it, but at that point, Vanderbilt's already back in the picture. So there's really no more advantage for Kevin Porter Jr. Kevin Porter Jr. tries to attack by that point because the Jae'Sean and Jabari miscommunication and misread on who was supposed to go in the corner, who's supposed to be the dunker spot in the 4-out 1-in. They're both essentially by the painted area. So Kevin Porter Jr. has no way of driving right and getting to the paint. So what does he do in that situation? No advantage. Jae'Sean comes, sets a screen. He slips, but there's no advantage there. Jae'Sean doesn't have an advantage. The ball goes back to Jalen. At this point, there is 7 seconds left on the shot clock. 7 seconds for Jalen Green to match up against Lauri Markkanen. Now, because of
Rockets wasted an entire possession.
Wasted an entire possession where, isolation, that situation is fine because Jalen can get past any defender, then he can make a driving kick pass. So, okay, you're going to expect that now. 7 seconds left. So Jalen goes right. He gets to right. He's funneled right into Jared Vanderbilt, who's helping up for Jae'Sean, who Jae'Sean is in the dunker spot. Instead of that, Jalen goes in to Vanderbilt, who's at the rim, tries to use his strength, his elbows, to create some space and put the shot up. It almost rolls in. He misses, but the Jae'Sean is there to clean it up. Now, why am I bringing up Jae'Sean the dunker spot? Jae'Sean's defender was Jared Vanderbilt. The guy next to Jae'Sean in the corner on that strong side where Jae'Sean was in the dunker spot was Eric Gordon. So let's say that help defender helps off of Eric to where's go to Jae'Sean. Jalen has the right side read open to Eric, but he didn't help. So Jae'Sean was wide open. He had an easy pass to Jae'Sean, didn't make that pass. Said Jalen took it up for the layup. Okay, Jalen got, and then Jae'Sean got the putback. Now there's the body languages I want you to keep in mind because I'm not doing a good job articulating it. You have to see the expressions on their faces, which is why I'm saying please check it out on Twitter. Positioning, timing, spacing. You can run the play all you want. You can have the mismatch all you want. But if you're not doing those things, what does it matter? You can sit here and blame Steven Silas all you want. But if they're going through this in training camp, the Rockets have a little triangle on the wing. So when the ball's on one side of the court and they're running their empty corner pick and roll, which means it's an easy way for Jalen to drive right, for example, not in this play I'm referencing, but just overall, players know where they're supposed to be. You should know where you're supposed to be. This is a fundamental concept in an offense. But we still have timing issues. We still have positioning issues. We still have, it's off. Young team mistakes. Okay. Now, the bright side of all of this is it's early. And also another bright side is I've seen enough the first few games where I don't think this is just a consistent problem. I think they fell into their bad habits the first quarter yesterday, but they came out of it. What happened in that fourth quarter? They played better. They at least had a structure going on. First few games, Atlanta, Memphis had a structure going on, played well. So I'm not going to sit here and bash Steven Silas. I'm not going to sit here and bash the coaching staff. I'm going to say it's a young team. And as a Rockets fan, you want consistency. I agree. I think that's fair. You know, you're hearing all about what the way this offense is supposed to look, and it hasn't looked like that consistently. You want consistency, but give it some time. Be a little bit more patient. Okay? Let's see what happens. I'm not defending anybody. I'm just showing you the facts. You can go back and watch the clips too with me. We can sit here and watch them together. We can go on Rockets Watch. Jackson, what do you say?
Yeah, why not? We'll fire up a Rockets Watch with special guest Alykhan Bijani one of these days.
We can do it. But what I want to preach is a little bit more patience. It is frustrating. I get frustrated watching this because I see the mistakes because they're correctable. And key right there, Jackson, correctable mistakes. They can fix it. They can learn from it. The effort, look at the effort in the fourth quarter in the second Jazz game. How well they played. Kevin Porter Jr. leading the charge. That's how they want to play. They want to move the ball side to side. They want to create an advantage. They want to attack. They don't want it to be where you have poor spacing. It's on one side of the floor, and then it's ISO ball. If it's ISO ball because of switching, that's fine because you're creating a mismatch. But if it's ISO ball because you're choosing not to pass the ball and the spacing is causing the errors, then we got a problem. And that's what happened in the first quarter yesterday. And that's what the Rockets have to be able to improve upon, and they're going to watch film on moving forward to make sure that doesn't happen.
At this point, I agree that there isn't any one finger to point the blame to, right? I think there are some question marks and some concerns about what the coaching staff is wanting to implement.
For sure. And I am not defending. If you're a coaching staff and you see your team falling into bad habits, you got to correct that. Yeah, you have told them, and I'm sure before the game they went through clips just to give Rockets fans an idea. Before the start of each game, during pregame shoot around, which Jackson attends, and Jackson's always there early. Jackson sees this too. Players are always with their assigned coaches, and they're sitting there and they're watching game tape. They're not watching game tape of just like, oh, look, this player can do this. They're watching game tape of how they're supposed to run their offense, how they're supposed to schematically do the defense, what to do in this situation. They go through all those things, and it's up to the players. So I am not defending the coaches. I'm just saying sometimes players fall into bad habits. But then in that situation, it's up to the coaches to be able to reel them back in, run a play or two. That's why the Rockets were so good at after timeouts. It's a structured play. Let's see more of those. I think that's what Rockets fans want to see, right? When you want to see more of those structured plays. But ultimately, there's not one single problem. It's a whole bunch of things going on that I think we have to be able to see through and see what happens.
And I'm with you on that. It is early. It's 5 games into the season. Hopefully they're able to sit down and look at the film and make the adjustments. We have collectively, all of us probably have a really bad taste in our mouths from this most recent Rockets game because it looked bad. It looked really bad through 3 quarters. Bad habits abound. It was not an enjoyable experience, and it wound up turning into the Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green show, and it didn't look good because the shots weren't falling. Sometimes it looks good because the shots are going in because they're just so supremely talented, right? And they can overcome the deficiencies within an offense or the deficiencies in the spacing, whatever, just because they're that good. But the goodness was not shining through those first 3 quarters, and it was a frustrating performance all around. But I do agree that it's not end of the world quite just yet. I do think there's issues that the coaching staff need to address. I think there's issues that Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green, they're not making the right reads at times on the floors. Even the play that we spent 5 minutes there breaking down and discussing. One of the first issues in that play to me is, yes, Jalen had the mismatch on Lauri Markkanen. But in his mind, he's tunnel visioning that mismatch. He wants to drive on that mismatch. But the problem is the Rockets had a 5v4 advantage in that like transition play. And it took Jalen way too long to realize that they had the advantage. And then Jared Vanderbilt was back in the play and they lost the advantage. So like that is a problem.
You have a team full of ball handlers, Jackson, and guys who like to have the ball in their hands. And this is not a knock. I am not knocking any player. I am not. It's a good thing to have guys who can handle basketball. But let's look at it here. Eric Gordon, he's playing next to Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr., who are going to have the ball in their hands a lot. He needs the shots, right? Jabari Smith, who's running a lot of pick and pops, he needs his shots. You have Jae'Sean, who's so good at driving, getting to his left. He needs his shots. Everybody needs their shots. But the key is, can you get your shots within the flow of the offense? That is what I want to see.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately what we all want to see. And the Rockets are going to have their work cut out for them. They play the Portland Trailblazers Friday night, and I hope, Alykhan, for your sake, for my sake, for all Rockets fans' sake, that we see some level of adjustments going into this game, because if they roll out the same stale offense that took place against the Utah Jazz, Rockets Twitter is going to burn down overnight. It's going to be, and it's going to be impressive to see, but I need to see some level of adjustments. Yeah. I need to see some bounce back in this next game against the Blazers.
And I want to give a big shout out to Rockets Reddit. I pay attention. Give a special shout out to Rockets Discord, to Clutch fans, to the Rockets Facebook groups. I'm in all of them. I pay attention. I want to give all of you.
Alykhan's a lurker. He's a fly on the wall.
I'm there. Maybe y'all can figure out my username. I also want to give a shout out real quick, Jackson, before we wrap up, to a couple Rockets fans who were nice enough to reach out when we were going over what they thought the problem with the Rockets offense are. And if it's okay with you, I want to read a few of those tweets.
Sure. Yeah.
Share the frustrations that, we've been seeing. So this is Chris, good friend of the show, Chris White. Too much ISO, not enough driving kick, spraying into the shooters, no movement or cutting. Why isn't Jabari pick and pop a staple of the offense? Where are the Jalen and Jabari pick and rolls? Our two franchise players, drivers not finding shooters in the corners. I can see the corner part for sure. Cooper Klein, there are only 2+ playmakers on the whole team, and one of them can dribble or create an advantage, and the other has to get his reps in a post-up that wants to move away and has turnover issues. Sam, KPJ is overexerted as an advantage creator. When he does create one, he doesn't have the processing speed to capitalize on it beyond a pull-up jumper basic pass. I mean, this just tells you a lot of frustration on Rockets Twitter. We've seen this. Jordan Jones, to me, it's positioning. Under D'Antoni, everyone had a pretty clear responsibility of their offensive positioning on the floor. I'm not sure that really exists in the system or it is being followed properly. That leads to a ton of basically poor ISOs or sloppy offense. And I'm going to say one more. Quellman. They don't run plays. The ISO is worse than when Harden was here. Oh, man. They don't look for Jabari much, if at all. Most of the time, all 5 positions are posted on the wing. When Jalen gets hot, he gets ignored. KPJ and Josh will drive in on 3 defenders and miss or get a turnover. And on and on and on. There's a lot of really good insight here from the fans' perspective. And I do want Rockets fans, if you are not on Twitter, to also take a look at some of these responses and see if you agree with any of the things that they're saying. If you agree with anything that we're saying, please comment on the YouTube channel. Please comment, reach out to us on Twitter. Let's have a conversation. It's a long season. I want to be able to hear what you have to say. Jackson wants to be able to hear what you have to say. But we appreciate you sharing these things with us. And I want to do a better job of sharing your responses on our show so everybody can hear different fans' perspective, right? Because you're a fan, you may think you may be around your small group, your small bubble of Rockets fans and feel a certain way about the team. But it's important to see how other Rockets fans are feeling too, so we have an understanding of kind of what the common understanding of the team is going on across the city, across the U.S., across the world. A lot of Rockets fans all over the world. So, but yeah, thanks for letting me share, Jackson.
This is a global organization, Alykhan, for sure. You know the drill. Let everyone know where they can track you down at.
Follow me on Twitter at Rockets_insider. You can also follow us at Locked On Rockets. I made a promise to y'all. I broke the promise. I said I would have a telestration play ready. We had a little emergency with the Utah Jazz game yesterday. I wanted to be able to talk about the offense. It's been a hot topic on every Rockets fan site discussion board. So it was a big deal for me and Jackson to discuss that. But I promise you, we will be doing telestration tools and having that on the show. So you're able to see that. And stay tuned for that next week.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, appreciate you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We are also on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.